Hi, welcome everyone to the special event tonight in preparation for Gimmel Tammuz. I want to especially thank all the Chabad houses that got involved in arranging this. The Chabad for Anglos in Efrat, in Beersheva, in Ramat Bet Shemesh Aleph, Rechavia Nachlaot, and Chabad of Baka, which is us. A little story that happened many years ago. There was three Hasidim of different rabbis who were sharing the greatness of their rabbis. One of them said that there was a time when they were struggling in their business, and thank God, after he received a blessing from his Rebbe, miraculously everything turned around for the better. Another Chassid of a different Rebbe said that unfortunately, after many years of not having children, he received a bracha from his Rebbe, and Baruch Hashem, they were blessed with a child. And then the Lubavitcher Chassid, who was a Chassid of one of the previous Rebbes of Chabad, said that there was a time when he was about to invest in a big business deal, and he wasn't sure whether he should take upon himself this investment or not. He asked the Rebbe for advice, and the Rebbe said to go for it. And he said, immediately after that, he lost a big sum of money. The other Hasidim couldn't understand. How does this show the greatness of your Rebbe? And he replied, the greatness of my Rebbe, that he taught us and implanted in us such a strong level of emunah, that even when we don't see revealed good, immediately after receiving advice and brach from a tzaddik, we still keep strong with our emunah, and we keep strong in our commitment to Torah mitzvahs. This may be a big message for all of us, especially now on Gimmel Tammuz. The last message that the Rebbe gave in the last mimer that was distributed shortly before Chav Zayin Adar, there the Rebbe speaks about the role of Nasi Hadar. As the Zohar says, that the Moshe Rabbeinu of every generation is called Raya Mehemna. As the Rebbe explained, this means the shepherd of faith. The one that his mission is to strengthen the emunah of every single Jew in his generation. We feel it very strongly with our Rebbe, how the emunah in Hashem, in Torah mitzvahs, in how checking tefillin mezuzahs, adding Torah mitzvahs in one's life will only brings greater blessings in the physical sense and the spiritual sense. So, on this day, we're going to hear more about the munah that the Rebbe showed us about living in Eretz Yisrael, being the most secure place for a Jew, and in Mirz Hashem, through this, we should be zoicha to already have the Geula. As the Rebbe said, that just like when we left Mitzrayim was in the schus of the munah, we should be zoicha through strengthening our munah tonight to have the Geula speedily right now. Thank you very much.
Welcome from the city of Avraham Avinu, Beersheva, Chabad Anglo Beersheva. Would like to thank you all across Eretz Yisrael for joining us for this wonderful Farbrengen and get together in honor of Gimmel Tammuz. I would like to now introduce Mendy Brod, who will be entertaining us with Hasidic Nigunim, the window to the neshama. Join along, sing along, clap, rejoice, and enjoy. Thank you very much for joining us.
Yeah. kodesh chazi sichon lirois uzcho chevoidecho uikein ba kodesh chazi sichon lirois uzcho uchevoidecho kein ba kodesh chazi sichon oy lirois uzcho uchevoidecho yama Visale freila we know what that's the yours the phone of the khayusin the river of the khayru let it Umino ala seores no deje uti ego por el ajejo y es mío radio umino ala seores no deje uti ego por el ajejo dai Lefono vicheusim Oy vam poyel achechu
Thank you very much, Mendy Brod, for inspiring us with special nigunim and melodies in honor of Gimmel Tammuz. If there is one person in the world, throughout all of the wars in Israel, that inspired everyone, that Eretz Yisrael, Israel, is the safest place in the world, as it says in the Torah, that Hashem's eyes are upon it from the beginning of the year until the end of the year, it's the Rebbe himself, as you can see in different videos of before the 6-Day War and also before the Gulf War, the Rebbe inspiring people from all backgrounds about the specialty of Eretz Yisrael. The fact that this Farbrengen is taking place a relatively speaking short time after the recent war of Shomer HaChamot over here in Israel, we felt that it's most appropriate to dedicate this Farbrengen to this theme of inspiring everyone over here in Israel and abroad, all of you that are watching our Farbrengen over here, how Eretz Yisrael is the safest place in the world, and how the Rebbe's message is most appropriate for now more than ever. It is my honor to introduce Rabbi Manis Friedman to address this special relevant subject in honor of the Rebbe and in honor of the Rebbe's yahrzeit. Rabbi Manis Friedman, bevakasha.
Thank you, Rabbi Goldberg, for this incredible event, and welcome to all the English-speaking Chabad houses and in Israel, and welcome to whoever is listening. It's going to be a meaningful, productive, and inspiring event. Thank you. The Rebbe often quoted the verse that says that Israel is the land which God's eye is upon it constantly, from the beginning of the year to the end of the year. And the Rebbe would ask, if you say constantly, why do you need to add from the beginning of the year to the end of the year? Tamid einei Hashem Elokecha bo, mereishis hashana v'ad achris shana. So, one of the ways of understanding is from the beginning of the year until the end of the year means from the beginning of years until the end of years, until the end of time. But still, it doesn't answer the question, because Tamid means forever. And the explanation is that there is a general oversight, that God's eye is upon the land constantly, but then God pays specific attention to what is happening each year in particular. So it's not just a general interest that God has, but a very detailed interest. Every year God gives us according to what the needs of that year are. And so the Rebbe says, the land of Israel is the safest place in the world. Has this changed since the Rebbe last said it? Who can speak for the Rebbe? I don't know. But since the Rebbe never gave a qualifying condition that this is true under certain circumstances, which would leave open the possibility that if the circumstances change, maybe the safety changes, the Rebbe made no such qualifications. And so we are safe to assume that if the Rebbe leaves it open-ended, that Israel is the safest place, then it will always be the safest place. And the Rebbe was so confident of the safety of people in Israel that during war times, when American kids studying in Israel asked the Rebbe if they should go home, and the Rebbe said, God forbid. Going home means you're frightened. So that will frighten the people in Israel, and that will dishearten them. You're not allowed to do that. Stay and everything will be fine. And those Chassidim who knew that you could trust the Rebbe in life and death issues kept their children in Israel, and every one of them was fine. What is the right approach? What are the rules of engagement? How do you fight an enemy? What's kosher, what's not kosher, and so on? There are secular rules, the agreements that were reached in the Geneva Convention, which created international law that if violated, you can be prosecuted for war crimes. It's a very nice idea, very noble idea. Just because you went to war doesn't mean you can do whatever you want. That's barbaric. So yes, there should be rules of engagement. But what are the Torah rules of engagement? What is the Jewish view? The Geneva Conference were a group of nations with very smart people representing them, coming up with a plan on how to make war more humane. Who says that's possible? How do you make war humane? It's how do you make hell comfortable? War is hell. So it's a very ambitious plan, hardly realistic. But if nations agree to certain rules, they can be enforced and they can be followed, and maybe some lives will be spared. Certainly worth a try. But this is certain, that if you have two countries going to war, one of them abides by the Geneva Convention and the other one does not, the one that does not has a very distinct advantage over the one that does, and then it should not apply. You can't have one person fighting the war with certain limits imposed by the Geneva Convention, and the other part, the enemy, are never agreed to the rules of the convention. So it would be a little suicidal for one side to abide by the rules while the other side is not. So as nice as the idea is, it's not always proper. Because sacrificing your own soldiers is also not a good idea. So war is hell? Yeah, no matter how you slice it. But to say you should sacrifice your soldiers to protect the soldiers of the enemy, that makes no sense. There's nothing moral about that. There's nothing godly about that. Your soldiers are not disposable, God forbid. So, what then are the moral parameters and the rules of engagement? The Torah says, this has been around forever, when you go to war on your enemy, here are the rules. Before you enter a city, you send a message in whatever form, whatever way. We are coming to attack your village or your city or your country. Those who want to leave may leave. You surround the city only from 3 sides, never from 4 sides. So those who want to leave may leave. Those who stay, agreeing to be welcome guests in your country once you capture the country, but they will have no rights, no voting rights. They can stay. Those who don't agree to either of them, get ready for war. That's a moral necessity, because not everybody in the country is your enemy, so they should be given the opportunity to leave. To not participate in the war. So if you're surrounding a city, only from 3 sides, one side needs to be open for people who want to leave. It's also logical. If you surround an enemy from all 4 sides, you have them trapped. When people are trapped, they will do desperate things. And that will cause a lot more damage and a lot more death. So don't force people into that position. Excuse me. Don't make them desperate. The second principle is, when you go to war, it's not against an army. You're going to war against an enemy that produced an army, and they can produce another army endlessly. So defeating an army doesn't mean you have won a victory, because that same nation, still your enemy, will produce a new batch of soldiers and go to war again. So you're warring with a people, not with their soldiers. And so the death of the soldiers is just as tragic as the death of civilians. You know, to make soldiers dispensable. Well, yeah, if soldiers get killed, who cares? Only if civilians get killed do we care. That is not moral. Soldiers are somebody's children. They're just as precious. So you go to war with a nation, not necessarily with its army. Another thing, you do not kill unnecessarily. Not civilians, not children, and not soldiers. Unnecessary death is not acceptable. However, telling your enemy, I will not shoot children, and I will not shoot civilians, and I will not shoot a temple or a holy place, that is not good policy. Because by telling your enemy that you will not shoot civilians, you're directly encouraging them to use civilians as shields. I mean, you just gave them the key to their victory. You told them what your handicap is. You can't shoot civilians. Well, guess what they're going to do? In response to what you told them. You tell them you will never shoot a child. What do you expect the next step is going to be? They're going to hide behind children. So if your policy is, I don't shoot children, then be careful about it as best as you can, but don't tell the enemy. The Jewish law says that if a Jew is kidnapped anywhere, it doesn't have to be during war, it doesn't have to be a soldier. Anytime a Jew is kidnapped and the ransom that they're asking for is exorbitant, you're not allowed to ransom the victim. Why? Because if people hear that you can get an exorbitant amount of money for a kidnapped Jew, you will make kidnapping Jews an industry. You encourage kidnapping. So you've got to have a longer view, a longer sight, not just an immediate result vision. Look at the fallout that your decisions are making. So at first, when you hear the Geneva Convention, we don't shoot civilians, we don't shoot on the holidays, we don't shoot at holy places, sounds really, really nice. But think a little further. Imagine that you make these laws and you accept these laws and you proclaim yourself committed to these laws. Now what's going to happen? Now every civilian is in danger and every child is in danger. So what you thought you were doing a kindness and you were saving the children, you actually put them in more danger. But if your enemy was unaware and your enemy was convinced that you'll wipe them out, men, women, and children, then they won't use children and they won't use civilians. Because what's the point? Then they'll protect their children and protect their civilians. So not every idea that sounds good at first blush is really a good idea. Number 3, a war to be moral must be brief. A protracted war, a long drawn-out war, is much worse than war itself. Because the same amount of people are going to get killed, just not all at once, which makes it feel a little easier on the conscience, because we're very impressed with numbers. If you read in the papers, 30,000 people were killed in this, sounds terrible, terrible. But 80 people, 90 people, sounds all right. 90 people this month, 90 people next month. In between, we have a ceasefire. Doesn't sound so bad because there's a pause. But to have a really moral, compelling reason to fight the war quickly is not because there will be fewer victims. It's because the children growing up. If war lasts a year, every child at all ages will have spent a year under the tyranny of war, running to bunkers, hiding in the cellars, reading the statistics of who got killed and how many. In other words, an entire year spent focused on war, afraid of war, excited by war, but war is on everybody's mind. So can you imagine a war that goes on for 17 years? All the kids are going to grow up knowing only war, their entire childhood. What kind of life, what kind of future are they going to have? So the most moral thing is finish the war before people get used to being at war. The sooner, the quicker, the better. The 6-day war was amazing. And the whole world applauded it. The whole world. Sure, they then accused Israel of starting the war. But that was just politics. You got to do that. On a personal level, everybody, even the worst of the worst, realized that something miraculous had taken place. Of biblical proportion. 3 armies attack Israel, and Israel wins the war in 6 days. Awesome. So just off the topic a little bit, are miracles still happening like in the olden days? Well, the Six-Day War was certainly one of those. And even today, 3,000 rockets land on Israel and there are 12 casualties. 12? Out of 3,000 rockets? Realistically, one rocket should bring at least 12 fatalities. All together, all you got was 12? And all the rockets of past years, where there were none, no victims. We've gotten used to it. Rockets land on Israeli city, no casualties reported. No casualties? These are not toy rockets. And yet, month after month, year after year, the rockets land, and the news is no victims reported, no casualties. That's a miracle greater than any miracle in the text, in the written Torah. So let's review. To fight a war properly, you have to realize that you are fighting a people, not an army. The way you fight the war is to bring it to a conclusion as quickly as possible. What does it take to bring that kind of a victory? No shortcuts. It's not like, let's stop in the middle of the fight so that it doesn't go on too long. The only way a war stops is if there's a very clearly and obviously identifiable victor and an equally obvious and identifiable loser. If both parties, for whatever reason, if both parties feel that they won, then there is no victory, because if nobody lost, then nobody won. So what is the major, primary, most important principle for fighting a war according to Judaism, according to Torah? Fight it to a convincing conclusion as quickly as possible. That's the name of the game. The prophecy that we have about the end of days, the coming of Mashiach. And by the way, the end of days doesn't mean the end of history. The end of the days of exile is what we're talking about. After the time period for exile is over, then we go back to being healthier and more real, each nation to their own country and their own place, etc. So everything that is happening today is in direct and almost instant proceeding towards Mashiach. Everything that's happening. Which means that it's moving every incident, every event, every battle, every tragedy, moves the world closer to what the world is meant to be. So a good example for this would be, you have a ship that is taking everybody to the promised land. Certainly where we should be. So let's say you're going from New York to the promised land, you would be traveling east. So we're all on this huge ship, and the ship is steaming east. But on the deck of this huge ship, there's a person walking towards the west on the deck of the ship. Would anybody worry? Would anybody be upset that this person is preventing us from arriving at the promised land? Not at all. Not at all. The ship is taking us in the right direction. There are people who want to go in the opposite direction, and they're actually walking in the opposite direction. But will that change God's plan or the direction? No, not at all. In fact, the people who are observant, believers, that's not a big accomplishment. People who are believers believe. People who are trusting trust. But when God says, I am God, your God, you should have no other gods, be good to your mother, and then turns around and says, and when you go to war, make sure you win quickly. Well, this sounds like a different woman. This doesn't sound like your mother. So, do we or don't we? You got to go to war because you have to go to war. Nobody should want it. Nobody should like it. Nobody should ever make it okay. It's never okay. It's just a necessary evil. And will this evil continue forever? No, it won't. So everything that happens, we have to look to see, where is the silver lining? How is this moving the world to a better place? Because it's guaranteed that it is. God has a single-minded commitment to the purpose for which he created the world. And every second, God is busy making sure that that would happen. And that's why it seems so sad that there is this divide in Israel between the observant and the non. And it's a very intense divide. High passions on both sides. In America, we don't have it that intense because it's not surprising. Everything in the Middle East is intense. Every decision is life and death. So yes, it's very intense. But here's an interesting observation. Before the state of Israel, Jews were living in great numbers all over Europe. And they were not getting along. The Jews of Russia did not get along with the Jews of Poland. Within Russia, the Jews in White Russia did not get along with Jews in the Ukraine. The Jews in the Ukraine did not get along with the Jews in Asia, the Asian part of Russia, in Samarkand, Uzbekistan. Different culture, different temperaments. So people in Europe, Jews in Europe, were not getting along with each other. In Poland, the different sections weren't getting along. Hungarians, Romanians, Czechoslovakians, nobody got along with anybody else. And they had big countries. A lot of empty space. But then the grandfather finds out that his grandchildren are going to America or to Israel. And they panic. They're afraid that the Jews won't get along. But somebody comes with a vision, with a dream, and says, if we can go back to our own land, we would be able to get along fabulously. Because the reason we can't get along is because we have different cultures and titles. If you call yourself a Ukrainian Jew, don't be surprised that the white Russian Jew doesn't want to meet you, doesn't want to talk to you. We go by labels. In Poland, there were the Galicianers and there were the others. They didn't get along. The Romanians and the Hungarians, they were of a different type of Hasidus, a different type of Jewish philosophy, and so they didn't get along with anybody else. So if that's true, how is Israel going to work? So the idea was, if we stop being Ukrainian, if we stop being white Russian, if we stop being Russian, and stop being Polish, and stop being Hungarian, just be a Jew, and leave politics out of it. If we're just Jews, of course we'll get along. Jews get along with Jews. However, it didn't happen. Jews came to America and they were no longer Russian, they were no longer Polish, they were no longer Sephardi. Now they were divided into religious and secular, into right wing and left wing, hawks and doves. So if you ask any guy in the street in Israel, what are you? He'll give you an identity badge. I'm the party of this group, I'm a member of that group. Everybody's got their opinion fixed in stone. Yes, there are groups who are more open, more welcoming, and so on. But the feeling in the atmosphere is, if you're not observant, then stay away from observant neighborhoods. It's like the sign when you enter Meir Sha'arim, which says, Jewish women and girls, you are not allowed to dress immodestly. Don't come into our neighborhoods unless you're dressed properly. Mm-hmm. Not exactly inviting. It's just a stark reminder of the difference of style, the difference of opinion, the difference of practice or degrees of practice that keep us divided. The Rebbe's attitude was, a Jew is a Jew, independent of how he behaves. So I was in Israel a few years ago. It was Hanukkah time. And it was beautiful because, unlike Minnesota, around that time of year, Hanukkah was the only holiday in evidence, which was beautiful. But there was a group of soldiers marching through Meir Sha'arim on their way to some danger spot because it was Hanukkah and the military was on high alert. There had been threats, possibilities. So this troop of soldiers is walking through double file, walking through the streets of Meir Sha'arim, And everybody there, the citizens of Mea Shearim, were all busy with their menorah. Getting oil, getting candles, setting them up right outside the door in front of the house. Beautiful scene. Really, really beautiful. But when these soldiers walked down the street, nobody said anything to them. Not happy holiday, Chag Sameach, happy Purim, or happy Hanukkah. Nothing, not a word. The tension was so thick, it was frightening. So, not every community has the philosophy of Chabad. If it was a Chabad community, you know what would happen. Soldiers walking through a Chabad community, every one of them would be asked to put on tefillin, to take along a little prayer book, to learn how to pray, to get blessings of a safe return, etc., etc. In fact, some people would give the soldier his menorah. Here, take it with you. Light it when you can. So Mea Shearim doesn't have that policy. But to not wish them well, that really, it was shocking to me. You're lighting your menorah peacefully, feeling quite secure, safe, because these soldiers are going to protect you. And you don't find it in yourself to say thank you? Of course, we call them soldiers. They're children. They're teenagers. They should be back in school. So it kind of ruined our whole trip. So I did a little survey. Stop people in the street and ask them, what are you? The answers were so varied. But nobody said, I'm a Jew. Stop people in the streets in Israel. What are you? Dati, Chiloni, Haredi. Nobody said Jewish. What am I? Right wing, left wing. No Jews? No Jews. Finally, I stopped one guy and I said, what are you? He says, Jewish, of course. I said, oh, where are you from? He said, Cleveland. So what happened was, the thinking was correct. If we stop being Hungarian or Ukrainian and just go back to being Jews, Jews would get along, even in a tiny little country like Israel. What went wrong is we never did go back to being Jewish. Today, in every Jewish freezer, this is for Yontif, this is for next week, this is for next Yontif. What happened to just being Jewish? That would be wonderful. So what do we need to do to help Israel? We need to encourage them. And we need to help boost their pride. We need more pride. Not personal pride. Not arrogance. National pride. Pride in our nation. Pride of our ancestry, of our past. Part of the Torah. Proud of the sages of the Torah. Just proud of everything Jewish. Because there is plenty to be proud of. And respectful, which is why we wear the gartel. So Israel, being the Holy Land, the Promised Land, is reserved forever, dedicated forever to the holiest people, to the temple, to the city of Jerusalem, and to the Jews who will come and celebrate and observe the holidays on the 3 festivals in Yerushalayim and so on. Jewish confidence, very important. Jewish confidence. If we fight with Jewish principles, not the Geneva Conference ideas, we will be convincingly victorious, and there will be no wars, and no one will get hurt for at least 40 years. Don't be defensive. Don't be apologetic. Be confident. Be clear. Be firm. This is the chosen land for the chosen people. It's the land of Israel for the people of Israel. That's just the way it is, and has always been, and always will be. So don't apologize. Don't get intimidated. The world needs to hear from us. The miracles that have happened in Israel shook the world with positive energy. The 6-Day War, incredible. The cathartic effect on the Jewish people was amazing. 2,000 years of oppression can leave a terrible mark on the collective memory. So when Jews do something uniquely Jewish, the world loves it. So the 6-Day War was definitely a Jewish approach, and it was magnificently effective, successful. The Yom Kippur War followed 10 years later because World War I was not completely resolved. That's why within 10 years there was another war. What does it mean, resolved? Resolved means your enemy nation are so convinced that they cannot win a war that they will not try again for at least 40 years until everyone who had seen the victory or the miracle would not be afraid to start again. And that can only happen if you're a generation removed. So the Torah is big enough to guarantee 40 years of peace, if we do it right. And 40 years of peace means nobody gets hurt, neither Jew nor Arab. So those are the principles. That's how you do it. You look towards getting people back to normal life, not live under war for 2 years, 5 years, 100 years, because that's destroying and killing the next generation, if we haven't already. So is Israel still the safest place? Probably is, yes. And why? Because it's time for Mashiach to come. That's the seat he's going to sit on. These are the mitzvahs he's going to ask you about. And it's our job to guide the world and be a light to the nations, even when it comes to how to fight a war. The Torah's value system is much more realistic and much more humane than the Geneva Convention. So we should be hopeful. We should be confident that good news is coming. This is all the last confusion before it's all resolved under Mashiach. And when you see the evil raising its head instead of hiding deep down inside somewhere, then you know that evil has reached its end. When evil itself starts to pray to God, then you're talking about a complete victory, a convincing victory. There isn't going to be a war after that. That is the story. That's the call of the hour. So we should have good news on this front, on all other fronts. Good news about everything for the whole world, not just for a piece of the world. But every mitzvah we do, even though it's just a little piece, but when it's gathered up and included with all the good and all the mitzvahs that previous generations performed, and even borrowing on credit for all the mitzvahs that Jews are going to do, that's pretty overwhelming, overwhelmingly good. So let's look forward to that. Israel is safe, it will be safe, it will be safer, it will be healthier, it will be wealthier, and it will be a beacon of light to the whole world. The world doesn't need oranges from Haifa. The world needs clarity from Sinai. And we were there at Sinai. So we carry this obligation to share the information we have with non-Jews, and the best way to do that is internet. The best way to battle or combat anti-Semitism is to produce pro-Semitism. Share your knowledge of Judaism, and the world will appreciate it to the point where they will thank you for going beyond the letter of the law, buying them not just one set of flowers, but 2 sets. Do we have opportunity for questions and answers? Can everybody unmute? Anybody? I just want to mention that we owe a great debt of gratitude for the Rebbe, for his involvement, his leadership, his foresight, and primarily for his courage. Many Israeli officials, high-ranking politicians, high-ranking soldiers would come to the Rebbe, and they would walk out of the Rebbe's room feeling like children. Some great leaders, famous leaders, but they would come out of the Rebbe's room feeling like children compared to the Rebbe. Fearless, clear-sighted, confident of our rights and our position and our chosenness. It was such a powerful injection of Jewish pride. They couldn't always live up to the Rebbe's standards because it took a lot of courage. But they recognized that the Rebbe had it and that they don't have it. They went back to their old policies. But hopefully, this time around, when everybody is so confused and nobody really has the answers, and it has humbled us and we're willing to admit that, now all we need to do is to ask, what does God expect of us from a Jewish perspective? And we will be healthier, we will be more moral, and we will be more successful. Thank you, and stand by for good news. Good news is coming.
Rabbi Friedman, thank you so much for joining us tonight and sharing with us. It's amazing and unbelievable to be able to experience firsthand the safety of Eretz Yisrael and the Kedusha of Eretz Yisrael. So thank you so much. My name's Shlomi Newman, and my wife and I run Chabad of Efrat English Division. We've been there for 3 years, and Baruch Hashem, the community is growing, and we're very excited to see what living in Eretz Yisrael, being in Eretz Yisrael, is going to turn into for the community. So again, thank you so much for joining us tonight, and I hope that we have more opportunities to meet next time and face-to-face with Hashem in the future. Thank you so much.
L'chaim, l'chaim. We very much want to thank Rabbi Manis Friedman, Mendy Broad, and all of you for joining us at this wonderful Gimmel Tammuz Farbrengen for the English-speaking community of Eretz Yisrael. I also want to thank all the organizers of this event, Chabad Anglo of Beersheba, Chabad of Baka, Yerushalayim, Chabad of Rechavia, Nachlaot, Yerushalayim, and Chabad of Efrat, English Division. We at Chabad of Dolev, Heichel Menachem, and Chabad of Ramat Beit Shemesh Aleph feel very honored to have the opportunity to participate in this wonderful event. Now, as the evening comes to a close, I would like to introduce Rabbi Chaim Faro. Rabbi Faro will share a few words of inspiration, and Rabbi Faro has been a shliach of the Rebbe for over 40 years. He's dedicated his life to spreading the wellsprings of Chassidus outward to many, many people. His work and dedication has changed the lives of countless people over the last few decades. Now, Rabbi Faro is also in the shliach in Ramat Beit Shemesh Aleph for the last 12 years, and is the Rav and leader of Chabad of Dolev and the broader English-speaking community. Thank you, Rabbi Faro, for joining us this evening.
During my years of shlichus in Manchester, England, I was giving a shiur in Perek Echod Layom, in one chapter per day of the Rambam Mishnah Torah. When I was visiting the Rebbe, I wrote in to the Rebbe that the time to prepare the shiur and to give the shiur makes it impossible to learn in addition 3 chapters of Rambam each day. The Rebbe answered my letter within less than 2 hours, and the Rebbe's answer was as follows: Harei ze pele, 3 exclamation marks. That which you write is ununderstandable. Harei hu rov v'tzorich lies mailin b'kodesh. you are a Rov, and you have to go higher and higher in Kedusha. I think that this answer is an amazing lesson for every one of us. The Rebbe wanted that we should never be complacent, we should never stand still. We should constantly be adding more and more in every area of serving Hashem. The Rebbe was constantly adding to the Mivtzoim and to the demands which he makes of every one of us to add more and more. Scientists say that on average, most people only use 5% of their brain power. 95% remains unused. The Rebbe was very much opposed to waste. I heard from Rabbi Label Groner Olav HaSholem that the Rebbe was very particular when he left a room to make sure that the electric lights were extinguished. The Rebbe wanted us, each one of us, to maximize our potential day by day and to constantly demand of ourselves to go higher and higher in Kedusha. This ensures constant growth and ensures that we will receive the brachas that we need in their fullest measure. The Rebbe gave us all of the ammunition that we need to finish off the war, the battle with the Sitra Achra, with the forces of evil in the world.
Okay.
Let us take fullest advantage of everything which the Rebbe gave us and finish off everything which needs to be done to bring Mashiach Tzidkeinu Lamato Me'asor Tvochim.
Thank you very much, Rabbi Farrow, for your inspiring words. And now we're going to hear once again Mendy Brod with Nigunei Chabad.
Elokeinu, Hu Avinu, Hu Malkeinu, Yoshienu, Hu Yoshienu, V'Yigdalenu, Ay, 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 Shenistekoi, V'Yashvinu, V'Racham V'Leini, Kol Chai Eloheinu, Eido al Tieschem, Achriski, V'Shisvi, Oislochem, Elohekim, Eido al Tieschem, Achriski, V'Shisvi, Oislochem, Elohekim. la